Norelco Cassette 1A, Kuhlman on India.
So even though this land has a recorded history of almost 5,000 years, I like the saying that was written some years ago that there was actually no such thing as the country of India until the British took a map, drew a line around it, and painted it all one color. And then this vast subcontinent became what we now know as India. It's really a world in itself, and we have to consider it as a world in itself. To describe it, you can't. The best way to, I think, see one of the confusions of India is the old Indian legend of the 5 blind men who were told to describe an elephant. You may have heard this. It's a classic Indian story. So the 5 blind men were placed in front of the elephant. Each one went up to feel it. The one blind man reached its trunk, felt the trunk, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a snake." The other blind man felt the tusk, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a pointed, curved stick." The third man felt the side of the elephant, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a very rough wall." The fourth blind man felt the huge leg of an elephant, and he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a tree, or it's a trunk of a tree." The last blind man got a hold of the tail, and he said, "Oh, it's like a rope with a tassel on the end of it." Well, India is like that too, depending upon which side of India you see, which side you happen to visit, and which side you look at. It's a subcontinent that is about half the size of the United States. It's cut off from the top. It's really the shape of a pear, sort of a pear if you look at it, an inverted pear. In fact, there is an old Indian name which means pear that is sometimes given to this land of India. It's cut off at the top by the Himalaya, or Himalaya as really the correct pronunciation, the mountains which run about 2,500 miles across the top of India. To the northwest of India, you have your Indus River, which sort of was the start of all the civilizations of India. It's a very primitive land. It's not an industrial land by any means. Its industries are way behind. It's mostly an agricultural land. Most of its agriculture is very primitive. The government is trying desperately to do something about speeding up agriculture to keep up with the tremendous growing population, but the population still seems to be growing much faster than the new developments in agriculture can manage to increase the rate of crops. The problems actually seem insurmountable. The first problem we've mentioned is that of overpopulation. To give you an idea, India is about half the size of the United States. We have 180 million people in the United States. Take half the United States and put 500 million people in that size, and you have India, with most of those 500 million people trying to live along the Mississippi River or the Ohio River or the few rivers that you would have in the remaining half of the United States, because this is only where they can grow in agriculture. Another problem India has is its language problem. Now, you may have read recently there were a few riots in South India because of, strangely enough, the question of language. What language is going to be taught? Well, it seems like a silly reason to have a great riot for us. But when you consider that in India there are 14 major languages, there are 225 distinctly different languages, and over 550 dialects that are spoken in this land. Hindi, or Hindu, is considered now the language of the government, but English is about the only language that can bind them all together. Now consider the school child who is brought up in one of these other languages and dialects. Most of the parents of the young children can only speak one language. The child is suddenly sent to school where Hindu is taught, and maybe English is taught, not even their own language. Suppose you would send your child to a school where you couldn't even speak the language that they were trying to teach your child, or trying to help and how could you help your child learn his education and learn his problems of everyday education? So you see why this language is such a tremendous thing to these people of India. And probably the third great problem that they have is the problem of religion. Now, we're not going to dwell on the religions as length as we did before we went into Casablanca, but we have to look at them very, very briefly, because everything you see is going to be a result of one of these religions. Now, on top of these 225 languages, this tremendous variation in climate, the great overpopulation, you have 8 religions, none of which can seem to live very happily with each other. Your first religion is the Hindu religion, the earliest religion. It's the earliest major religion that is existing in the world today. Then you have your Buddhism. You have your Sikhs. You have your Jains. You have your Parsis. And you'll be seeing some of the temples of these people, and you should have a little bit idea of why they are. Then you have your Muslims, and you have your Christians, and you have your Jews. And then many variations of all of these different sects, all of which try in harmony, but when you get into the land of India, you will understand the great problems that these religions have. As the final analysis, and then we'll go briefly into a little background and then describe the different cities you're going to see, I ran just the other day across a new analogy of India which intrigued me very much. It said, suppose you take all of Europe, somehow manage to put them under one prime minister, under one parliament, under the same government, all the countries of Europe. Then take away 2/3 of the land of Europe. Take away 3/4 of Europe's wealth. In that little space, with so little money, you would still then have the Spanish-speaking Spanish, the Bulgar-speaking Bulgarians, the Russians distrusting the English, the French now sort of trying to undermine everybody along the way, and put this tightly together in one land, and you have practically what is present-day India, and this tremendous problems that India is trying to surmount. Well, where did India get its name? Up to the northwest is the river now called the Indus River, I-N-D-U-S. Years ago, the old name for the Indus River was the Sindhu River. So if you take that a little farther, the first primitive peoples that were living up there were called the Hindu people, which comes from the word Sindhu. It's very easily split in your different dialects over to Hindu, which means the people beyond the Indus or the Sindhu River. And the name India also comes from Sindhu to Hindu to India, which means the land beyond and south of this river. And this is where the principal religion, Hindu, or Hinduism, gets its name. I shouldn't call it a religion, because the Hindu religion is not really a religion as we Westerners know it. It's more of a philosophy or a way of life. This is the first great religion, and about 80% of the people that live in this country belong to it. And particularly when you go to Benares, you're going to see sights that will intrigue you, sights that will amaze you, sights that you really don't believe you're seeing at all, and also sights that will appall you. But the Hindu religion believes in a way in one God, although it doesn't believe God, you have to sort of put in quotation marks, which is a little different conception of God. Now, I'm not a scholar of religion, and a lot about the Hindu religion I don't understand myself. The more and more you read, as with the Western mind, the more confused you become. But the early phases of this religion were the peoples who believed in spirits. They believed in the spirit of a tree, they believed in the spirit, well, even the cow, which is now sacred. The cow to them was an extremely good thing. They could use it as a beast of burden, they could ride on it, they could get milk from the cow. The cow dung, actually, if you forgive me talking about it, if it was spread on the walls, it was discovered would keep away insects that spread disease. It was also found that it was a great fuel. If you would spread it on the floor, which is still done in some of the Hindu homes, it forms a very hard floor, can be washed, and also it gives off heat during the cold night. So the cow was a very important thing to them, so they felt there was something in the spirit of the cow that was very good, so we have to hold the cow sacred. Well, there were many spirits, many things to believe in, and gradually a religion was formed where one manifestation of all of these different spirits, you could believe in many different things, but actually what you were believing in was the different variations of the one thing of trying to find a better way of life. The supreme being was Brahma, and there were three manifestations, and now this is taking the religion very fast, of Brahma himself. The first is Brahma, the creator, and he's usually depicted with four heads because he sees in all directions, four arms because he encompasses everything. Vishnu was the preserver, and you'll see temples that are dedicated to Vishnu. And the one that seems to have had the greatest effect and the greatest manifestation on all the people is the god Shiva, S-I-V-A. Shiva was the destroyer of all things and also the creator of all things. And the great religion, most of the religions of the world, worship the creative process and the creation and the giving of life. So here, the God who destroyed everything, created everything. It's our old saying that time destroys all that it creates over a period of time. So this religion was sort of developed that you had to accept your lot. No matter what you were, how poor you were, how good you were, you had to try to believe in whatever avenue was open to you to reach a oneness with this God, Brahma. What was beyond the oneness, no one knew. It couldn't be any worse than you were now, but you would reach a oneness no matter what manifestation of God you happen to choose. And that's why you'll see hundreds of gods, thousands of gods, all different kinds. You wonder how this Hindu religion can be so widespread, so different, so varied. But each person is to choose whichever God they, and whichever way of life they can find to bring them into the oneness with to the ultimate end, which is still a mystery to all these people. Well, the second important religion is the Buddha religion. We won't dwell on it at all now, except very, very briefly. Buddhism is probably has the fewest adherents of any of the major religions in India, which is surprising because Buddha was born in India, and at one time India was greatly a Buddhist country. However, because of subsequent kings, Buddhism was virtually stamped out in India. It is making a comeback. But now you find most of your Buddhist people in the lands that we're going to visit later, in Thailand, in Japan, some in there, but in the other countries of Indonesia and the places we will visit in a week or two from now, you will find your basic Buddhist people. But Buddha was born in India. He was a very wealthy man. He owned 3 palaces himself. He had a wife. He had some children. And at the age of 29, he began to feel very, very sorry for the poor people, the oppressed people of India. And he left all his wealth, left everything he had, started out alone in his search for mental peace. And he finally evolved several tenets, the principal one being that all the pain, all the sorrow in the world is caused by our own greed for worldly pleasures. He wasn't interested in a God beyond. He was mostly interested in how you can help yourself to accept the life that you have right now. And if you forgive, if you forget worldly pleasures, if you forget your greed, you will be a happy person in the lot in which you have to live. It was pretty good religion for that time of the history of the world, and a good religion for many of these people right now. Then you have the Sikhs. And you'll see a lot of Sikhs when you get to Bombay. These are the men that have the long beards that are beautifully, or sometimes they're wrapped, sometimes they are braided and tucked up under their turbans. The Sikhs are considered the great fighters of northern India. They were an effort to break away from the Hindu religion, which held the people in one certain caste. So when you see the men with the long, beautiful beards, they have them pretty well tucked up under the turban. It's against their religion to cut their hair because long hair indicates manliness. They wear a wooden comb in their hair. Usually it's hidden by a turban, but sometimes it's not. These are the Sikhs that you will run into. They are the great fighters. A lot of them are taxi drivers in Bombay. So if you see a taxi driver with a turban and a long, beautiful beard, you know he is one of the Sikhs. The Sikh gets its name, S-I-K-H, from the old word Singh, which means lion or lionheart. It's where we get the name Singapore, and we'll talk about the lion people when we get there. Another religion we must talk about just briefly, because you'll visit one of their temples in Bombay, is the Jain religion, the J-A-I-N. Now these people also were breaking away from the Hindu religion. One of the most important things in their concept of religion is respect for all human life. Human life didn't have very much value in India years ago, but they carried it so far, and still do, that anything that lives, breathes, walks, or moves, to the tiniest insect, the tiniest gnat, is a creation of the supreme creator and must not be destroyed. So when you visit the Jain temple, you may see some of the high priests sitting with masks over their face. This is not because they are afraid of catching hold or they're afraid of giving you a cold. It is so that they do not inadvertently even inhale the tiniest insect that may be flying in the air. When they walk, they're careful where they walk so that they don't step foot on any insect or any little animal that might be having to crawling along. The last interesting sect you'll see are the Parsis. These are the people who were driven out of Persia many, many years ago, and the name comes from the city of Par in Persia. The Parsis came to India seeking a religious haven, a place where they could live and worship as they wanted to. The king of India, the ruler of India, he wasn't a king at that time, but the ruler of the area around Bombay, sort of where they first settled, agreed that they could come in and live if they would not try to get more followers for their religion. They weren't allowed to go out and do any missionary work for their religion, so they agreed. Also, they realized when they came in that because of the Hindu caste system, that if they really did go out and try to get adherents, probably all they would get were the very poor, the untouchable, the lowest class of India. So their religion is a very ingrown one. There are only about 125,000 of them living today, and they cannot marry out of their religion. And if you're going to be a Parsi, you have to be a Parsi. The interesting thing about them is that they are the followers of Zoroaster. Remember reading about him in your early days. He's also called Zarathustra, the god of fire. According to their belief, Zoroaster, who originated the precepts of their religion, was born in Persia many years ago. When he was born, the chief magician of his village was told somehow that a mysterious child had been born. The magician felt he had to destroy the child, so when the child's mother went out to do shopping or whatever she did, the magician came in, stole the child, took him to the temple of fire, and threw him in the flames. The mother came home, was very distracted, rushed to the temple to pray for her child, and to her amazement found the child sitting in the flames, happily playing and completely unhurt. Now this is the legend that is the beginning of this strange Parsi religion. I'm telling you about it because if you travel around Bombay again, when you get to the lovely hanging gardens, the guides will point out to you the series of vultures that are wheeling around off in the distance, around and around and around. It's a rather gruesome story, but you must know because it is part of this strange land. The vultures are over what the 5 great towers that are called the Towers of Silence. The Parsis believe that fire is sacred, that the earth is sacred, that water is sacred, it cannot be defiled. So what are you going to do with someone who has died? The Hindus cremate. Well, if they cremate a body, you will make less sacred the fire. So you can't cremate it because it's a desecration. If you bury him, you desecrate the ground. If you would put him out to sea, you would desecrate the water. They evolved this strange method, and you will be hearing about it when you're there, of getting rid, not getting rid, that's a wrong term to use, you don't get rid of, but what you do with your dead. They take them to the Towers of Silence. They sit in the groves that surround the towers. Non-believers now cannot get into the tower area. You go by the wall, you see the trees, and you'll see the many vultures. Sometimes you get a beautiful shot of the vultures sitting right on the trees. But the dead are then placed in these Towers of Silence. Within 7 minutes, the entire body is devoured. There is nothing left but the bones. Then the bones are put in a pit in the center. Lime is put on them, and gradually the bones will disintegrate. But the flesh of mankind, the flesh that is inherent, perhaps with evil, is never allowed to desecrate the air or the fire or the water. An interesting thing. Now, if any of you are really interested in religions, I suggest you go to the museum in Bombay, the Prince Albert Museum, where there is a big model of the Towers of Silence, and you can see exactly how this strange religion works. So out of all this religion, this incredible mixture of people, you have this land that we're going to visit tomorrow. You have the land of India. Well, as I said, the first basic people started about 5,000 years ago up by the Indus River. The people were living along there when Egypt was in its infancy, long before Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt into the Promised Land. Long before that, there was a fairly good civilization up in northwest India, in the northwestern part of the plain. Then from Asia Minor came some people called the Dravidians, and also then from another area came the Aryans. We know the Aryans as a people. We've heard about them. Aryan means the people of the soil. These people spoke a Sanskrit language, which is very much akin to Greek and Latin, and the early languages that our languages are a derivative from. But you have these three peoples going together, forming together their different ideas. They had no set religion, but they began to believe in the spirits that we thought about, mentioned before. Each different groups of people were separate from each other. They tried in a way to keep their own identity, to keep separate, and over a period of years, the thing that is called the caste system evolved. We've all heard about it, we've read about it. There are 4 distinct castes. You will still see evidence of it in India, although for the last some years the government has been trying to blunt out this caste system. But the most important people in the caste were the teachers and the priests. And they were considered to be represented by the head of man, the thought, the knowledge of man. The next most important were the warriors, and they were symbolized by the heart and the courage of the heart. The third class, and each class had a step down, was a merchant, and they were represented by the thighs of the body. The last class was the peasant class, the lowest of any class that counted at all, and they are thought of as the feet of the human being. And they do the walking, they do the plodding. And then the fifth are the untouchables, or the mud underneath them. And it became, as these classes grew and grew, it became almost forbidden for even one caste to talk to another. You could not intermarry. If you were born a warrior, you stayed a warrior all your life. If you were born a merchant, you stayed a merchant all your life. If you were born in the mud, you stayed in the mud all your life. There was no hope for you at all. And there were many subdivisions of all these castes too. The only hope, and these people had to have some hope. You can't go through life without hope. The only hope they had was evolved again in this Hindu religion, and this is where the idea of transmigrations of souls would come. While you were in this life, if you were in the mud, that's where you stayed. But if you were tried to do the best you could under your circumstances, when you died, your soul might go into the next class, and you would be a little better off. Then if you died in that class, if you were a good peasant, you might go into the merchant class. If you were a good merchant when you died, you might go into the warrior class. If you were a good warrior when you were killed, if you were very good, you might go into the class of the priests. When you reached that class, then when you finally died, you had no higher class to go, so if you were a good priest, you would finally reach the oneness of the Hindu religion. You would finally reach the happiness, which is still a mystery, but the final attainment. Well, this is the great religion of India. Then about 500 BC, the man named Buddha was born. Buddha was formed a rebellion against all of this idea of if you're very poor, you must be poor. If you live in abject poverty, you must spend your life in abject poverty. So Buddha spent many years wandering, sitting, and thinking. Finally, he came to Benares to start preaching his philosophy of life. That really, it wasn't that you were born in this class, but if you were in a class, if you were not greedy, if you were not looking for, didn't have personal desires, you could more or less be happy in the lot of life that you had now. And I mention Buddha again because when you go to Benares, many of you will visit Sarnath, which is the town just on the outskirts of Benares. There will be a tremendous tree that you will be shown, and this is supposedly the tree or the offshoot of the tree where Buddha sat and delivered his first sermon to mankind. Well, after Buddha and the Buddhism began to sweep this land, then you remember from your Western history, Alexander the Great came from Greece. Instead of going into Eastern or Western Europe, he came into this land and tried to unify the entire continent. Well, Alexander the Great, this was about 300 BC, managed to unify part of it. He died when he was very young, and upon his death, why, his empire fell apart. And the next great man that comes along, still BC, is Ashoka. Some of you are going to go to the Ashoka Hotel. When you're in Delhi, some of you will see the great Ashoka Tower. And if you read your historians, this man Ashoka was considered to be probably the greatest ruler that has ever been known in history. And here was one of the first great rulers of this land that was really concerned about his people. He tried to convert the people to Buddhism, to get them away from this hopeless system of the Hindu religion. He tried to help the poor people. He tried to distribute the wealth. He built great columns all over the land. And on the columns was the inscription, "For the welfare and happiness of all mankind," not just the top people, but the poorest people too. And during this time, until about 400 years after Christ, this is considered the golden age of India, when there was really a great effort being made to try to help the very poor, try to help the downtrodden. From that time on until the present day, no effort was made again. But during the golden age of India, Ashoka did everything he could for the people. He tried to send the Buddhist religion, which he believed in, to Ceylon. He tried to send the Buddhist religion into China, where it caught hold. He sent it into Japan, where it began to catch hold. He unified India really for the first time. But as always happens with one great man in history, his sons were used to wealth. They became more dissolute. His grandsons became more dissolute. Finally, his grandsons and great-grandsons were unable to control this land of India, and it fell apart again into little empires. About this time, Christ was born and Mohammed was born. Now, Christ had no impact on this land at all for many, many years, but Mohammed did. The Turks became Mohammedans. The Turks saw the great wealth down in this land, the jewels, the magnificence that could be found here. So from the north came the Mughals, or we call it the Mughal. Mongol is another word for it, the word for Mongolians. The Mughals came down, and they were Mohammedans. Now, as we mentioned a long time ago, the Mohammed religion was a religion of the sword. It was an important religion, but in those days, you either became a Muslim, you believed in Mohammed, or you died. So down came the Mongol people. The India itself had fallen apart after the Great Golden Era, and the Mohammedans had very little trouble in conquering the people and pulling it back together again. Their first great ruler was Akbar. Now we're about the time of Queen Elizabeth I in England. You know, Elizabeth of Essex. We moved along up to that period to help orient yourself. Akbar was a great ruler. He unified India. However, unfortunately, he was not too interested in the poor man and the common lot. He was interested in religious freedom, but he was more interested in building tremendous temples, in building great palaces in which to live. And he is the man that built Fatehpur Sikri. Many of you are going to visit this city of Fatehpur Sikri, the deserted city. It's outside of Agra, and some of the tours will have time to go. It's about 40 miles away. The city is an interesting background because Akbar, for many years, did not have any male heirs that lived. The mortality rate of children in India was dreadful at the time. Finally, he was on the spot where Fatehpur Sikri now stands. It was a mountaintop, and there he found a religious man who told him that he indeed would have another son. That son would live, and the son would carry on his dynasty. So as a monument to the holy man, Akbar had the entire top of the hill chopped off, had this magnificent city that, according to the historians, was more magnificent than any city in Europe at the time. The emissaries from London and Queen Elizabeth used to come down and would gasp at the magnificence of this city, the opulence of it, the life that the court led at the time. This is where the Parcheesi court is that we saw in the picture the first day, where the ladies of the harem used to act as chess pieces on the Parcheesi court. So you have your great Akbar, who began to unify this land again. His grandson was a man that you all know, a man that has, I think, caused more people to come to India than any other one man in the history of this land, and his grandson was Shah Jahan, who built the great Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan was probably the greatest lover of jewels, the greatest lover of opulence in the entire history of the world, and certainly he had at his disposal probably the greatest collection of gems the world has ever known. Well, Shah Jahan was deposed and imprisoned by his own son. His son's son deposed his son, as was the custom of the day. Gradually, this great empire fell apart. The Persians came in, sacked India again, took away the jewels. They stripped the Taj Mahal down to the beautiful simplicity that you will see when you get there a day or two from now. Took away the famed peacock throne from Delhi, which is probably the most valuable one bit of throne and jewelry the world has ever known. And the Mughal Empire fell apart. The Mohammedans couldn't control this land, and you have sort of a power vacuum, and just about this time, the Portuguese moved in. Now, we've gone over that story, so we won't dwell on it again. Vasco da Gama got to Calicut. The Portuguese settled there. Then they settled the area that is known as Bombay. The Dutch came along, which we talked about. The British came along. Then Catherine Berganza of Portugal married Charles II of England, and as part of her dowry, she took this land of Bombay, the island, because actually Bombay is an island. The island was given to England. I'm sure it's a present that the Portuguese had many, many times regretted ever giving away, but they did. The local rulers of all this land of India, which had fallen apart as far as one ruler is concerned, one man ruled here, one man ruled there, they would ally themselves, some with the Dutch, some with the French, some with the British, each one thinking that they would have protection from the Western powers against their next-door neighbor in India. But gradually the British amassed more and more of India, particularly under Clive. You've all read and heard about Clive of India, or Cleve as he is also known. And India became entirely under the British.
Norelco Cassette 1B, continuation of Kuhlman on India.
Actually means the man with the great soul. And he, in his own quiet way and his idea of nonviolence, worked and worked and worked for self-rule of India. Gandhi, as you know, was murdered in 1948. Some of you may see the area where his body was cremated. Then his ashes were taken to the Ganges, to several of the rivers, but part of the ashes to the Ganges and sprinkled in the water. Gradually, India has achieved its independence, but in achieving its independence, it has not achieved the solution to its problems. You have your famine, you have your overpopulation, you have your disease. Many people, you will sit, and as you go around, you'll see many people sitting on the curbs, sitting on the sidewalks, and our impulse being the Western world saying, why don't these people get out and do something? If they'd only work, why they wouldn't be in that position. Well, there has been, particularly for the older people of India, so much disease, so much famine, so much lack of food, that many of these people are literally incapable of working properly and working as they should. So you have this great, vast, wondrous land of India. Well, you're not going to see it first when you get to Bombay, where we arrive tomorrow morning. Bombay was first a trading post for the Portuguese, and that's how it got its name. Bom in Portuguese means beautiful. So Bombay means the beautiful harbor of this land. Originally, it was 7 little islands on which the Portuguese settled. Gradually, the islands and the passageways between the islands were filled together. Now there is a causeway into the mainland, and you have this city of Bombay, which is probably the most western city in all of India. And when you first arrive, you'll think, well, it looks pretty much like colonial England. That in fact, some of the areas almost reminded me of the colonial parts of South Africa that we saw last week. The traffic in Bombay is horrendous. Cars all over the place. The only thing that saves it from being utterly clogged up is that in Bombay, the cows, the sacred cows, are not allowed to roam freely. They're all sort of when a cow starts wandering down the street, they're very politely and nicely taken by the police down to a compound where they can live happily ever after. When you get to some of the other cities, the major traffic jams are caused by the cows who have the right of way over everybody else. You will travel around Bombay. You see the beautiful museum. If any of you are interested, it has an art collection of Indian art. It has, let's say, Towers of Silence, if you're interested in that sort of background on religion. Otherwise, the museum itself. Bombay is not a great place for sightseeing, particularly. You will go to the Hanging Gardens, which are very beautiful. They're called hanging because they are gardens. They seem to be just built up on a hill, but they are built on top of reservoirs for the water of the city. Many years ago, the reservoirs, these huge tanks, were all open. The problem there was the reservoirs were very near the Towers of Silence, and as the vultures used to fly over, sometimes little bits of flesh would kind of drop into the reservoir. So there was this great move to do away with the Towers of Silence. A very wealthy Parsi gave the money so that they could cover over this entire area, cover it with earth, then from about 2 to 7 feet thick, and on top of it plant these very beautiful gardens. You'll see the shrubbery, that some of it is clipped in the shape of a cow, some of it is clipped in the shape of an ostrich, all different animals in this very fantastic and unusual garden. I think you will enjoy thoroughly. This is where you'll also visit the Jain temple with all of its incense inside and the beautiful flowers strewn around, and the priests, perhaps sometimes they are, sometimes they're often at a service, with the gauze over their mouths. Another interesting thing in Bombay that I found is the public laundry. And if you live in Bombay, a man will come around every so often and collect your laundry. Then he will take it down to this great big open space where each little laundryman has his own little stall with water flowing by. And you see hundreds and hundreds of laundrymen down there pounding the laundry with a stick, beating away at it. Socks and everything go right in, and eventually your laundry is brought back very, very clean. I understand from a friend who lives in Bombay that the charge for this laundry is very nominal, and that your socks and your handkerchiefs are laundered free. So if you don't want to pay for any more socks or handkerchiefs on the ship, ladies and gentlemen, why, give them to a good Indian when you get there, and of course they may be full of holes from all the pounding when you get them back, but it's a way of getting your laundry done in Bombay. If at night you are there, you're adventuresome, you may want to go into the area called the cages. It's a strange and unusual thing. The cages are where all the ladies of the evening, shall we say, the poor ladies who have literally no other way of making a living, and the men of the evening too, will live in these one stall right next to another called the cages, and you will see the local people. I certainly wouldn't get out of the cab. I would have a very good taxi driver, and they will only skirt the edges of it. As we were going along, we saw one of the places. It's called the Blue House. Inside there is a very, very dim blue light, and this is where you have a very aging relative. You don't have money to feed the relative. You don't have money for doctors. You take the relative there, and there are berths and berths, sort of like a dormitory, and the people are just in there and are waiting to die. And the relative can come and visit them once in a while. These are the famous Blue Houses. There's a great beauty in this city. The Taj Mahal Hotel, a beautiful hotel down on the waterfront where the great gateway to India is located. You will see it. It was built to commemorate the visit of King George V and Queen Mary II. Well, then we're going on, many of us, to Benares, which is really, to me, the heart of India, the heart and soul of this land, particularly of the Hindu religion. Benares is the sacred city. It's considered one of the oldest cities in all the world. The Ganges is considered sacred because it flows from the hair of Shiva. Now, Shiva, as I said, is one of the manifestations of Brahma. Shiva is the great destroyer, and Shiva is also the great giver of life. According to the old story, some princes had died, their souls, they were cremated, and their ashes had to be washed and purified before they could ascend to heaven. So the goddess Ganga, the goddess of water, it was decided that she was to come down to earth to purify the souls of the princes with the water. Well, the people up in the heavens knew that if this great goddess of water suddenly came down, there would be a terrific flood, the earth would be inundated. So the god Shiva said, well, all right, you can use my hair as a sort of a net in which the water can flow from the heavens down. So the god of Shiva, the water was trickled down through the hair of the god. It washed the souls of these princesses. The souls immediately went to the oneness with Brahma. Since that time, this has been considered the sacred river. And to die in Benares means that you will be purified. You will have no more transmigration of soul. If you die in Benares, you can go directly to the nirvana or the oneness. If you cannot get to Benares, if you have relatives who can bring your ashes, and the ashes are strewn into the river, this will purify your ashes, and you can go on into the better life. When you're down on the waterfront, you go down very early in the morning, and you get on these little boats, and you are rowed about the 4 miles along the side of the river. One side is teeming with life. There doesn't seem to be a square inch of people. The people are there bathing in the water. The water is absolutely, to us, it is absolutely filthy. But it is generally conceded there is some strange antibiotic in it that stops these people from getting any diseases at all. They may be rinsing their mouth out in the water. They may actually be drinking it. They may be brushing their teeth. They may be washing their clothes. Everything in this sacred river. On the other side of the bank, there was virtually no one, because according to tradition, if you die on that side of the river, you are turned into a donkey, and you start at the very lowest of life and have to go through the whole cycle again. So everybody's over on one side early in the morning. It's quite a fascinating and unusual place. You'll see young girls down there with flowers that are floated out into the river. You'll see them with cans with little candles inside. They light the candles and float them out to the god Shiva, to the great god Brahma. All of them worshiping in their own way. As you go along the narrow, twisted streets, you'll see the very old people, the crippled people, everyone there living under just a canopy, sometimes not even that, because they know that if they die in this city, they will achieve a better life later on. You will see people with beautiful brass pots where they're collecting water to take home all over India to their relatives, because it is thought that if a man dies and a drop of water from the Ganges is placed on his eyelids, he will be purified and he will be able to move on into a better life. 1 million people a year come to this city for their pilgrimage. So it is one of the strangest, most unusual sights that you will see. There you will see the problems of India, and there you will see the actual soul of India. Very near Benares, you will go out to Sarnath, where you see the bo tree under which Buddha preached his first sermon. You will see the great stupa, or the huge pillar, where some of the, it is thought that part of some little relic of Buddha, I'm not sure at this point whether it's his finger or tooth or what it is, in which it is buried. And you may see the devout going around saying their prayers to Buddha, and they circle this huge stupa 108 times while they are saying their prayers. Just another interesting sidelight in what you're going to see. Also, Benares is noted for its other side. It's an industrial city where some of the finest brasswork and the most beautiful saris anywhere in India are made, and you will be able, if you have time, to look at those while you are there. There will be some in the hotels, and sometimes, if it isn't too rushed, you even go out and watch saris being made. Agra we'll dwell on just briefly. You've all read so much about the Taj Mahal. You've looked at pictures of the Taj Mahal. It always is I think, the highlight of our trip to India. The Taj Mahal is so arranged that you have to go, it's surrounded by a tremendous wall. You go in the beautiful main entryway, and you see the Taj as one unit. It seems to float in the air. The design is simply miraculous. Historians disagree. Was it designed by the Shah Jahan itself? Some historians say it was designed by a Persian. Other historians say that the architecture was done by a Venetian. But men from all over the world were brought to build the Taj Mahal. And it literally seems to float in air. The 4 minarets on either corner, and this strange, magnificent building seems to float right inside on this huge bubble of air. As you see it, most of the grandeur from the inside has been stripped away. Originally it was covered with gold, with priceless gems. These gems were taken away by the Shah's son, who deposed his father and imprisoned him after the Taj Mahal was built, and squandered the gems away, and then later when the Persians sacked the area, they took away everything that was left. However, they didn't take away the semi-precious stones that are in the marble, in the carvings on the wall. That beauty still remains. And in fact, some of the people who made study of architecture say that the Taj Mahal probably now is more beautiful than it was during its original state, when it was so opulent, when it was so full of gold, so full of stones, that you couldn't appreciate the real beauty of the Taj itself. When you're looking at the Taj, your guides may or may not point this out to you, there are many, many inscriptions all the way up the side of the building, the facade of the building, up as high as 20, 30, 40, 50 feet. And if you really study it, when you look at it from a distance, all the inscriptions look at the same size. The Taj, the inscriptions are so arranged that they're smaller at the bottom, and as they grow up, they progressively get larger and larger until they are much larger at the top than they are at the bottom. But it was so cleverly designed that from a distance, they look exactly the same size. When you go inside, you'll see one of the most beautiful works of art in the world, the great marble screen that was added later after most of the gold had been stripped away by Shah Jahan's son. Taj Mahal is named for the Mumtaz Mahal, which means the light of the palace. She was the favorite wife of Shah Jahan. He had 2 wives and 400 ladies of the harem. But this woman was his favorite wife. She went with him to the fields of battle. She died while giving birth to her 14th child. Again, this was the idea of having as many sons as possible because the death rate was so high among children, and also to keep yourself on a throne. If you had just one son, your son was probably going to do you in or murder you before you got very old, the minute he was old enough to come to power. So Shah Jahan, there was another side to this man besides the great romanticist that we usually think of. Shah Jahan had several sons and pitted them against each other. In fact, the Shah himself, who built this greatest monument of all to love, murdered 3 of his brothers to get the throne himself. Well, finally, one of his sons managed to depose his father, and his father was imprisoned in the fort. Now, in Agra, you may or you may not see the big fort. It's a huge fortress, not too interesting inside. It's interesting from one standpoint, though, that in the fort, the Shah Jahan was imprisoned overlooking the river, and for the last 7 years of his life, he had to sit in this one room with the one window where he could overlook and see this beautiful monument he had built to his wife. When he died, his son had the grace to bring his body back to the Taj Mahal and bury it alongside the queen and the woman he loved. So this great love story has a fascinating history behind it, and you again will hear it repeated when the guides tell you, but I thought I'd go over a little today, because sometimes when a guide has a slight accent and things, if you know in advance what he is telling you, the basic outline, you can understand it a little better. The last town we'll consider is Delhi. To me, it's one of the most uninteresting of them all. There is a New Delhi and an Old Delhi. Now, King George V in 1911 decided to move the capital of India from Calcutta to Delhi, which is much more centrally located. And at that time, he wrote that the new city was to be built alongside the very old city of Old Delhi. And Old Delhi actually is a series of 7 cities that were built over a period of time. But New Delhi was to be built, and he wrote, "It is my desire that the planning and designing of the public buildings to be erected be considered with the greatest deliberation and care, so that the new creation may be in every way worthy of this ancient and beautiful city." So the planners went right ahead and with complete irrelevance built a neoclassic Greek city that has nothing to do with English architecture, has nothing to do with Indian architecture, nothing to do with Mughal architecture. So there you have this strange, unusual parliament and all the buildings of the capital of India in New Delhi, which are such a jar and such a jolt compared to the type of architecture and the type of beauty that you've seen up until that time. The entire city is dominated by the Red Fort of New Delhi. It's quite lovely from the outside. It would take weeks to go through the many buildings, the many rooms. It was sacked by the Persians. In this area was the great Peacock Throne, which you will be told about. You probably read about it. It was considered at that time to be worth $30 million, one of the most expensive bits of gold and precious gems that have ever been assembled at one time. The Peacock Throne was taken by the Persians. It was taken into Persia. It was broken up. It was destroyed. But the Indians still speak about that as a reminder of their greatest days of glory. About a few little tips about traveling. The food, don't expect to gain any weight while you're in India. It just is not that good. It's sort of acceptable, let's put it that way. You will get the best there is, and that's the way it is. I wouldn't eat any salad. I wouldn't eat that sort of thing. Nothing raw. Everything I would eat, certainly see that it is cooked. Generally along the way, I drink bottled water if I were you, just to be on the safe side. The trains are much better than they were in Africa. The food is much worse. In Africa, I was really surprised at the really tremendous and wonderful food that we got. As far as shopping is concerned, the rupee is the monetary value. It's worth about 14 or 15 cents roughly in there. Don't buy, as I mentioned the other day, please don't buy on the black market, particularly when you're in Bombay. In front of this many shops, you'll have a little man come up to you and say, well, I want to change rupees, and you will get many more for the dollar. But if a policeman happens to come along, you could be in a little bit of trouble. Brassware you will see all over India, beautifully done. You may want to lug it home, but be sure, ladies, before you take that gorgeous-looking tray home, that you have a place at home where to put it. Mine is under the bed for the past 4 years, and I don't think it'll ever come out from under the bed. In Delhi, you'll find lovely ivory. You'll find some jewels. Again, jewels in India used to be a tremendous buy. They still can be if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know jewelry, I certainly wouldn't invest thousands and thousands of dollars in jewelry as people have done, because the jewel merchants in India know the value of jewelry also, and you will pay, maybe not as much as the States, but it isn't like it used to be 10, 15 years ago when you would get jewels for a third or even a quarter of the price that you would have to pay for them in the States. That situation doesn't exist anymore. I usually don't talk about places to shop, and I'm not going to this morning. However, in New Delhi, there is one big store where ivory and jewels, we found them usually to be very, very good. That is called the Ivory Palace. Now, there's the Ivory Mart and Ivory this and the Ivory that, but the Ivory Palace is generally considered to be very, very good. Most of the things I buy, I take along. Many of the places, they will promise to mail them for you, but India, in its mailing at times has a problem. Not that the store might not mail it. A lot of my mail has never gotten out of India. I don't mean to scare you to death, but if you get home and you find somebody didn't get a postcard you sent them, if sometimes a little postal worker who is working for just a few rupees a month, it's an awfully great temptation to take the stamp off the card and resell it, because a few stamps might mean the difference between his child having enough to eat that day and his child not having enough to eat that day. Now, I'm not saying the Indian postal system is bad. It is usually very, very good. But if at times something doesn't get through one of your letters, don't blame the ship for not having mailed it, but it can happen here in India. In Agra, the first day we did the pictures, I showed you a very beautiful and unbelievable carpet. It's called the Pride of India. That shop is Ganeshi Lal. Now, there are lots of Lal shops all over the place, but they, again, are considered one of the finest in Agra. And if you want to go see it, it's certainly worth a visit to see this fabulous carpet of untold wealth, untold gems that have been sewn in it with gold thread and silver thread. Ask to go to the place where the Pride of India carpet is located. Cloth, you can buy your saris, you can have them, they will teach you how to drape them. You can have them made up into lovely evening clothes, or we'll have a rash of saris when we get back on the ship. In fact, there's going to be the sari evening. They are very expensive, the very big good ones, because the cloth, the inside, this very gauze-like cloth, is gold and silver. You read in the paper this morning that Mr. Sandrewski wrote about how women have actually gold and silver woven into the cloth, because it is then their personal possession. When the sari wears out, the cloth is burned, the gold and silver is retained and is sold again. So This is what makes the very fine saris, and they can run up to hundreds and hundreds of dollars for the long sari. Quite a few of you, by the way, have asked me about this jacket that I've been wearing on and off. They asked me where in India I got it. It is Indian raw silk, but I didn't get it in India. I bought the cloth there. I took it along to Hong Kong and had it made up, because I discovered in India, if you buy a ready-made coat, they're sort of made for the Indians, and somehow they're not put together the same way that Western man is, and I haven't found a coat there that fits very well. Another thing, just a little bit over, but about this shopping that's coming up, because pretty soon we're going into Hong Kong, you can find hundreds of tailors there, we'll talk about some of them, that can make the clothes and make these jackets up at much cheaper than you can get them in the States. But to get them really well done, even in Hong Kong, you have to have 3, 4, 5 fittings. And I found people who suddenly get to Hong Kong, spend all their time running back and forth to the tailor every half hour, and end up not seeing Hong Kong at all. So don't buy bolts of cloth in India and spend your time in Hong Kong doing nothing but standing with your arms back and getting stuck with pins along the way. Well, I don't know what else to tell you about the shopping. I don't know what else to tell you about India, except that here, from the beautiful, magnificent pink city of Jaipur, or Jaipur, it's used interchangeably. If you look underneath, you'll find tremendous poverty there. From the sunrise in Darjeeling, which is the most breathtaking in the world, to the most abject, heartbreaking poverty that you will see anywhere. Children, mothers sleeping in the streets without a roof over their heads. This is India. The many faces, you will only see a portion of it, but when you leave, perhaps you will have a better understanding of the horrendous problems that face one of the most beautiful lands in all the world. Thank you for your attention.